Hey, everybody. Welcome to SF Indie Fest, the eclectic all independent film festival that we've been doing for over 2 decades in San Francisco. Um, we are kind of always an irreverent festival, as those of you that have attended in the past know. And we really like films about people's passions. And so we're lucky enough to kind of score really big here with a life's work. And with it, we have two of the subjects of the film, Jeff Stein and Bob Darden, and filmmaker David Licata. So if we can welcome them. Thanks, guys.
Hello. Thank you.
Thanks again for both making a wonderful film and also for those on the other side of the camera letting David tell your stories. I think a good way to kind of kick things off, David, is like, what inspired you to go on this journey to kind of explore some of the themes of the film, and how did you discover Jeff and Bob and what they were doing?
Yeah, so there's two events that are kind of closely linked but many years apart. One was I went to Catholic school, and at one point when I was probably 9, the nuns said, like, cathedrals took generations of stonemasons to make, and that just like, I was just like, what? That was crazy. So that always stuck in my head as I went around and traveled and stuff. And then, I don't know, what is it, like 16 years ago, my mother died. And so I was kind of like, just thinking about what it's all about, and the cathedrals popped into my mind. And I was like, well, what do people think? Like, what do other people do, like if they're following this throughout their life? And so that was kind of it. And Jeff, I found out about Paolo, Jeff's, I guess, mentor, who started Arcosante. He can tell you more about that. And so Jeff and I came into contact that way. And Bob, actually, a friend of mine heard you on Fresh Air. And he said, you might want to check this guy out. He might be really good for your film. And I just need to listen like 3 minutes. I think it was like Terry Gross. Is that the one you were on? Yeah. And I was just like, perfect. Let's go.
As an architect, I understand how long it takes to make buildings, but I was surprised at how long it took to make this film.
Yes, well,
every few months I would call up David and say, hey, when can we see? And David would say, oh, almost.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah, it's amazing, when you're making creative projects like documentaries, is that you're kind of wanting to kind of pull back to the next layer, and that takes a little bit of time to, not just become, kind of expert in the subject matter, but also just kind of let it absorb into you to understand, like, what is you as a filmmaker? What is it that you want to say, and so I guess as you kind of started to kind of dig in, David, what was what was it about the stories that you decided to feature? Because I'm sure there were folks that were kind of left on the cutting room floor of like, what was it about Jeff and Arcosante and Bob, what about, like, was it where you're like, this kind of is kind of a distilled version of, what kind of, makes these people tick?
Yeah. A couple of things. One is, I didn't think the film would take 15 years to make, but I thought it would take, 3 years, 4 years. And so even that amount, I thought, well, if I'm going to be living with this, it has to be something that I like, or something I care about, something I'm interested in. And a friend of mine suggested Arcosante when she knew I was making the film, and I looked into that, and I was like, this is perfect. I mean, it's basically, it fits in with the whole cathedral theme, the building, right? And even though it's not a cathedral in any way. And then with Bob, I thought, I'm interested in music, and here was this totally forgotten stuff, these records that are out there that just nobody's paying attention to. And the music is amazing. And so the thought of like telling that story and using that music was just, that was all I needed. Yeah.
And when David approached you guys, like, how did you feel about, being on, being filmed and letting your kind of passions be shared? I mean, in some ways it makes sense. It's like, if you're really excited about something, you want to be able to kind of share your love with the world. But at the same time, you also not just what you're excited about, but you yourself also kind of become the focus of it. So was it weird, having David kind of follow you around with a camera and interview you, or do you just kind of just go with the flow?
It wasn't too weird. Actually, if you're a writer, perhaps you want to do your best work in secret. But as an architect, you'd like to show it off and have more people come and see it and be able to have discussions about it and see where you're making the wrong turn and move forward instead. And anyway, Arcosanti has been for 50 years a kind of a public place. And so it was just natural to have David come and do some filming of it. It's also a very beautiful place too. So there are all kinds of reasons for a filmmaker to be there. And it felt lucky and comfortable to be able to talk to David Licata about this place and the work. He had clearly done some homework and understood what we were trying to do, what's still trying to be accomplished with Arcosanti there in Central Arizona. And so it was very easy to talk to him about it and fun to see how he would take it and make it into film.
Well, first off, Jeff and I have been talking about doing the whole Herzog thing and doing a documentary on the documentary that was made about us. It's a lot easier doing it in Chicago than it is in the Amazon.
Yes, I was just watching that last night, in fact.
Yeah.
Everything that Jeff said, and to be honest, every time I do any media, somebody tracks me down and calls and said, I've got a bunch of old gospel vinyl in grandma's attic. Do you want it? And a good percentage of what we have saved has come from not the big collectors, but from people who saw or read something about the project and said, the idea that an old fat white guy at Baylor University is trying to save Black gospel music is an easy hook and easy to remember. And some of the most extraordinary vinyl we have received has been somebody who read or saw something about us. So I was thrilled. And I'm hoping exactly that happens with A Life's Work.
Yeah. The film A Life's Work is not only good for David Licata, but it's a tool for those of us who are in the film to see what happens with a larger audience.
Yeah, and I found like people just love talking about the thing that they are really passionate about. It's like they don't want to hide that, So everybody was very generous in that way.
Well, I'm trying to think of the way to formulate this question, right? But the thing that I found, in the film, David, is that, a documentary, in some ways, you're casting people too. In the sense of like life and the world defines it, but like. Jeff and Bob and, others in the film, they're really good storytellers too, right? So it's not like they're just able to passion. It's like you guys were able to translate your passion, the things that you love, and be able to get me passionate about it. And not everybody that has a passion has that tool, right? And so what is it that you think makes that difference? Because I'm thinking about all the people out there that might have their passions, but they're kind of stuck inside their head, And so did you run into that, David, as you were kind of exploring and trying to figure out whose stories to share?
No, I didn't, because most I guess all of them were pretty media savvy in their own way. They weren't, unfamiliar with being in front of a camera or a microphone. And so they were pretty comfortable and very articulate, as you can tell. So it didn't. I guess in one sense I was lucky, but at the same time I'd heard of these people. I'd heard them speak. And I knew that they could talk about what they really love and in terms that would be interesting and poetic.
And sure, there's film and there's literature, but architecture is a storytelling art. it tells the story of people's relationships within the building to people outside, and to the history of the place where the building is, and what the future wants to be, and all of that stuff. The great stories are told with architecture. And so to translate that into film, I don't know, might have been pretty easy.
Well, I can say I've actually visited Arcasante maybe 10 or 12 years ago, something like that. And yeah, I mean, it is one of those places that just kind of have to be seen to be experienced. And it was great to kind of hear even stories on the ground with being there for a day. So for those of you that have a chance post pandemic, it's time to hit the road.
Yeah.
And then you can turn up the radio up to 11 and just kind of enjoy a great road trip. So, Bob and Jeff, can you kind of get the audience up to speed? It's like, what's happened? Or are there any stories you'd like to share, kind of like post locked edit with the film, of what the status is of both these situations?
If you don't mind, I'll go first. We now provide the music for the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., the gospel music. We were featured the music and the preaching in Dr. Henry Louis Gates' upcoming series on PBS in February on the Black Church in America.
Oh, cool.
And in fact, he came down and interviewed me. I don't know how much of me they're going to use because he filmed me between Jeremiah Wright and TJ Jakes, but my little head's in there at some point looking wise, talking about it. We've continued to grow. We've had an extraordinary series of deans of the library, who this actually falls under, although I'm in the School of Arts and Sciences, who have embraced and supported it, from their Patty Orr to John Wilson to the current dean, Jeffrey Archer. And each one has brought something to more expand and keep it going. The early fears that I had that when the original grant ran out, that David may remember, had turned out not to be a problem. Baylor has embraced it, and it has made it part of their culture here. And it's where people bringing visitors to campus take and show. And I do way too many tours for the amount of money I make for this. But it's part of the job is to, as Jeff said, you share that passion and you tell the stories, partly because the stories are so easy to tell. They tell themselves. You have been immersed in this for so long. As a writer, you can cherry pick, and as David knows, the stories that best tell this particular aspect of it. You don't tell every story. You tell the ones that are most illustrative of what it means to do and what it means to preserve.
Yeah. Yes, well, since the film has been made, of course, we've had this pandemic and a few other interesting issues in the United States. But Arcosanti has remained open to the public. You have to call ahead and make arrangements for a tour, but you can still tour the place. And it's the Paulo Soleri's original workshops in Scottsdale, Arizona, Cosanti, are also open. And since the film, the campus of Arcosanti has become the home to the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, which is a National Architecture Accrediting Board accredited Master of Architecture program. And at this time, like all schools, some of the students are at home in their foreign countries online taking classes, but otherwise things are going on at Arcosanti. So it's a real going concern, and we're sort of handing it off to the next generation of architects and thinkers and makers to continue the project.
Cool. So I have a question for each of you that kind of springs forth from the same idea. And so I'll share it, and then we'll start with Bob. And so, Bob, I wonder, like, is there kind of like a holy grail recording that you've heard about that is just kind of like this, it's this ghost that you're waiting for it to kind of pop up? And David, what's the story that kind of you had to cut out from the final film that just made it a better film, but is just a great story that, you'd like to share with us here? And then Jeff, is that,
Oh, you froze. This is just like public television.
It's
The
like-
interviewer froze.
It was a good time to take a screenshot, I think.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and did you hear my last part there, Jeff?
No.
Oh, okay. But David, you heard mine, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Jeff, I was wondering, it's like, as Paulo Serre's, influence continues in the world, like, where do you kind of hope things will be 10 to 20 years from now, in the world, and how we might continue to see these kind of influences in architecture? So maybe we'll start off with Bob, and then we'll kind of work our way.
the Staple Singers recorded a single at the very earliest part of their career that got them going. And a copy of that has never turned up, not with the
Wow.
three big collectors, not with the Black Gospel Project.
Wow.
We've done everything we know how to do, as have they. And it's a sad testament to the ephemeral nature of this, one of the biggest groups of all time. And yet we can't put our hands on a single 45. And secondly, most of the sermons that changed the world during the civil rights movement, with the exception of Martin Luther King, nobody seems to have copies of those. We know they were made, but there are no copies of Ralph Abernathy's sermons or no Fred Shuttlesworth sermons. And since we collect both, we would love to become the repository and preserve and save all of those. And those are two that immediately jump to mind.
Very cool. I say, can only imagine that, as this film gets seen, and so particularly during different film festivals around the South, is that, it's amazing how word of mouth works in some way. I at least know this as a documentary filmmaker myself, and I'm sure this happened with David in making the film, is that, it's like, you kind of, you hear about something just, over some coffee in the afternoon, and you're like, wait, I didn't even realize I needed that.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
So was there anybody who didn't make the final cut of the film that you really, liked?
Yeah, there was one person, she was actually a professor at NYU, and it was mostly my misconception of what she was doing. But I became intrigued because the Etruscan language has never been really translated. They know what a few words are, but I mean, this was a highly literate society. They knew that they had plays, they knew that they had epics, and yet there's like nothing exists. And so I was talking to her about it, and part of the story didn't really go where I wanted it to go. And then on top of that, I thought 5 was going to be too many. So unfortunately, those, and other reasons, but those two really are the main ones. Fortunately, I didn't pursue her, and shoot her like I did Jeff and Bob. It was really, a few days shooting of her teaching and talking and interview and stuff. And so that wasn't, I didn't use up a lot of time and resources that way, but unfortunately I couldn't do it. So.
And Jeff, where do you kind of hope the kind of continued influence, or how it might help to continue to change the world?
Well, when I first came to Arcosante in the early 70s, when it was just beginning, I was young and taking some time out from architecture school, and really naive. And the hundreds of us who were there at that time thought, well, we'll build this Arcosante as a demonstration project for how three-dimensional cities can really be. And then we'll just go off and build the next one in some other country. And pretty soon there'll be a whole network of these things. And turns out it didn't quite work out that way. But in another 10 to 15 years, even before then, I hope that some of the ideas that we have put into concrete at Arcosanti will inform discussions around the world about how we're going to live, how 8 billion of us humans are going to share the earth with each other and with other hundreds of millions of other species, and see what solutions are coming up, and we hope that the ideas that we've begun with this project and that David has documented in this film will be part of a larger discussion.
Cool. And it looks like Jill has just arrived in the waiting room.
Oh,
So we'll bring her on board and welcome her to the team.
absolutely.
Hello.
Hi.
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 Excellent. Hey, Jill.
I
Better
went to
late
the
than
wrong
never.
meeting.
Well, welcome, Jill. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers with SF Indie Fest. We've started the Q&A and have kind of delved into the discussion. And so maybe to kind of get you up to speed, maybe, David, can you tell us a little bit about Jill's work and what kind of drew you to want to include her in the story? And Jill, how you felt when David approached you about being in the film?
Yeah, absolutely. SETI was one of those things. I have an older brother who's an engineer, and like since I was 12 or something, I knew about SETI. They were just like always there on my radar, you know. And then more so with SETI at home when they were using people's, you know, home computers to, you know, basically create a network, which was pretty amazing. And so they were always there. And when it came time to actually, you know, proceed and you know, just go ahead. She was actually the first person, I think the first person that I reached out to, and she generously accepted the invitation to do this. So.
And Jill, how did you feel when David approached you about capturing your story?
Well, I usually somewhere in talks that I give make note of the fact that this is likely to be a multi-generational project and that we need to find an appropriate funding environment to make that happen. And we need to have the right mindset and not go to the telescope every day and say, oh, I'm going to get a signal today, right? Because you're going to go to bed disappointed. And so then what do you do in terms of satisfaction along the way? And I've told David that for me, it's figuring out a way to do the search better tomorrow than we could do yesterday. And there have been huge improvements in the technology and the capabilities of the search. And of course, all throughout my scientific career, we've had amazing game changers. You know, exoplanets, we now know that there are more planets than stars in the Milky Way galaxy. When we started, we didn't know that there were going to be any planets around any other stars. And then extremophiles. We've found life on Earth that lives in environments which we would have previously said couldn't possibly support life, but they do. So there's a lot more potentially habitable real estate out there than when we started. And that's enjoyable progress.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is kind of a question for Bob, Jill, and Jeff. So, you know, one of the things we get to know is, you know, the things that kind of motivate you and drive your passions. And it seems like all three of you are very kind of forward thinking about how this work continues, you know. And so I wonder, like, when you're doing the work, do you also kind of give a lot of thought to the people that came before you, even if it was they were doing something different that's kind of allowed you to kind of, you know, pursue your passions in the way that you are, you know? Or do you kind of see yourself as kind of at the beginning of the starting point? Like, how much you see a lot towards the future? How much do you think, do all three of you kind of reflect on the past and what you're building upon?
Well, I think we all are standing on the shoulders of people who came before us, and we're just part of our time. This is our time. People that came before us made it possible for us to do this sort of work, and so sometimes we think we're trying to make it possible for the next generation to do some even more interesting work. But we're part of a continuum.
Absolutely.
And for those of you that, sometimes, as you travel around, or just, pre-pandemic, the conversation at the dinner party, there's a lot of people, I think, that sometimes get enthralled that somebody could find something that they are so excited about, For those of you, those out there in the world that just like haven't found the thing that kind of, I don't know, motivates them, I guess, in some way, like what sort of, not guidance, but like, is there an anecdote that any four of you would like to share of like how you were able to kind of discover the thing that excited you most, and also what kept on going? Even, I mean, like David worked on this film for 15 years. I'm sure there were difficult times during it. Like, how do you know that this is the thing to continue to work on?
Yeah, I kept wondering whether this film wouldn't actually be an episode for the film.
I thought about it, but I'm too shy.
Unlike Jill and Jeff and even David, who have backgrounds in the things that they love, I'm just an old journalist, and just an old writer who loved gospel music, but certainly didn't have any aspirations beyond that. And I would tell them that if you keep looking honestly, it will find you, because this found me. All I did was, after writing a book on the history of gospel music, the next day after fresh air, a gentleman called and said, "You figure out." No, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. That would be one to cut, David. A gentleman called in New York and said, "You figure out how to save it." I'd written the editorial for the New York Times because I was lamenting the loss of all this music, and he said, "You figure out how to save it and I'll pay for it." Certainly I don't take any credit for all that. I've just been shepherding this thing, like you said, a river, Jeff, just continuing to go through and trying to stay honest and honorable and open to wherever it calls and takes me.
And Jill, what is it that, like, over the years of working on this, research and things, what's kind of like one of the more kind of like common questions that you get from people when they kind of try to understand what makes you want to kind of continue to pursue it, knowing how long the journey is?
Well, unfortunately, some of the questions I still get after all these years is a confusion with UFOs. And it's, we've tried really hard to explain that this is a scientific exploration and is being done in the most rigorous way we know how. And that if I were ever to make a claim for successful detection, that you had better expect from me really bulletproof evidence of what I'm saying.
Yeah, most definitely.
Go ahead.
Oh, and yeah, how did you kind of see your filmmaking process, David, in the sense that did you find out what you wanted to say in the editing room, or how much of it were you aware of it? How much of it was discovery during the kind of production process versus?
The thing I wrestled with the most was how do you end a film that doesn't have an ending? Like, there's no like big moment of like, I've done it, right? It's just like they're just continuing to do their work, like everybody else. So that was something I wrestled with a really long time. Until I was in the editing room, and the editing room, that's my house, where I was looking at the footage and sort of looking at similarities and differences and contrasts and things, and that's really when it took shape. When I can't say that I like had a good outline, beforehand. That really came later. That came afterwards.
And with Jeff and Jill and Bob, like, with the work that you do, is there ever a point in time that you kind of sit back and reflect of like, hey, I've done a really great job here? Or is it always this kind of forward momentum? I mean, like, do you get a chance to enjoy your accomplishments, or I mean, not to sound trite, but I mean, is it the journey just the destination, I guess, in what you love?
Well, the journey's pretty enjoyable, and Arcosante, as you know, because you've been there, is in uh, magnificent natural landscape. And so there's always, especially since, it's meant to be a walking townscape. And so the distance that's traveled between work and play and lunch and breakfast and socializing is just on foot, and it takes a moment. And so without a long car commute, there's extra time in the day, and plenty of time to reflect on what's been accomplished so far, and to actually enjoy it, and the people who are around you because of it.
Yeah, radio astronomy facilities tend to be in very isolated places, right? Because we don't want the electronic noise from all of our devices interfering with the telescopes, which means that they have marvelous skies, right? They're not full of light pollution. And so when you walk out amongst the telescopes in the middle of the night, you're just engulfed by this fantastic universe of stars. And it's really a personal, amazing kind of experience. We were in parks in New South Wales, Australia, for Comet Kahutek, and to see that taking up the entire sky is just a magnificent opportunity to feel very much connected with the cosmos.
And Jill, I have to ask just a slight tangential question just because of the news, but with that recent loss of the radio telescope, and I forgot if it was in
Arecibo,
where was that?
Arecibo, Puerto Rico.
Arecibo, Puerto Rico. How does that affect the research that SETI does? And for those that are kind of outside the field, what does the loss of a tool like that's impact have?
Well, it was a unique facility, right? Huge telescope that added sensitivity to all of the projects it was involved with. We had stopped doing our SETI observations there in 2004 because we wanted to spend our money building a telescope, the Allen Telescope Array, that we could be on the sky 24/7 and not just 15% of the time, which is what we were using Arecibo for. Breakthrough Listen had been using Arecibo to record data for their project. And the thing that's really was singular, and we don't have a good replacement for it, was the radar, the planetary radar at that telescope. So that has been used to look at the surface of near-Earth objects and map them. It's most important is that after a new object is found, it's important to get its orbit very exactly so that when you lose it, you can find it again and assess its probability of intersecting with the Earth. And so that planetary radar was extremely valuable for that kind of a task. And so right now we don't have a replacement for it. Whether or not the large telescope in China, the FAST telescope, which is actually like Arecibo, it's actually a little bit bigger than Arecibo, whether they will instrument a transmitter, a radar there, I'm not sure. But yeah, it was being used to find gravitational waves. There's a program called Nanograv. It's a network of telescopes, and when Arecibo was part of that network, it was much more sensitive. You could look much deeper than it is now.
I think it grows again.
Sent him spiraling into meditation on that.
Well, thankfully that kept on recording while my technical difficulties happened. As we kind of work to wrap this up, one question for David and then a question for everybody. So David, like, as you kind of dug into this film, what sort of films and filmmakers kind of influenced the approach or the visual style that you wanted to take with this film?
The biggest influence was the Earl Morris film, Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, because he was doing, that. I mean, he's basically doing this, right? He had like 4 people and he's jumping back and forth and they're talking about, you know, the things they love. I mean, Morris loves, you know, sort of fringy people, the peculiarity and stuff, which I wasn't interested in. I love Earl Morris, but I wasn't interested in that. So, but it still was like very much like I used that film to like, you know, create storyboard, like outline everything and how to do that. I mean, it was like, that was it. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's a great film. And I think that one took him 20 something years to make. So yeah.
so there you go. Yeah. I feel so bad.
And so I know that there are going to be many people in the audience that are going to want to kind of continue to follow the 4 of you and the work that you do. Can each of you kind of say how people can kind of continue to kind of follow your work, whether it be on social media or websites, etc.?
Oh, sure. For me at Arcosanti, just look in on the Arcosanti website, arcosanti.org. And or you can follow Arcosanti on Instagram too. And there are updates on a daily basis.
So for me, it's the same. The website is SETI.org, and we have a social media that you can follow. You can get to it from the website.
Nice.
And through Baylor, or you can just type in Black Gospel Music Restoration Project, or that acronym. And now just Google my name and Black Gospel and it'll take you there. It's we don't have the kind of vigorous social media that everybody else does, but then it's just me and a few engineers and they spend a lot of their time like little gnomes digitizing rare records. So
And Robert, you're happy with the digital quality that you're able to get now?
we have and I've upgraded several times. It's the finest that money can buy. And since we moved into preaching, we've added the same thing for reel to digital, cassette to digital, beta to digital. And no, we're not happy. But the old formats, particularly those god awful 8 tracks, are just not going to give you a great signal. But we get as good as can be got.
Okay.
This is industry standard at the moment.
I guess like a lot of things, it's about evolving process. It's like, you know, I assume you bring in new technology whenever it's available.
Yeah.
And David, what's the best way to kind of follow your work as a filmmaker, and also if we want to see a life's work and kind of be able to kind of share it to other friends and family around the U.S.?
Yeah. There's a website, alifesworkmovie.com. I'm on Instagram as well, David.Licata or David Licata. And that's about it. I haven't been on Facebook much. I mean, it does have a page, A Life's Work there. Been sort of backing off of Facebook, and that's it. And you can reach me, you know, any of those ways. Yeah, and I'd love people to reach me. So please bring it on.
Great. Well, David, thanks again for sharing your film with SF Indie Fest, and Bob, Jill, and Jeff. You know, thanks for sharing your story with us and David, and just continue doing the great work that you all do. So have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Again,